The arrest of Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955 are cornerstones of the civil rights movement, and the lawyer who represented those plaintiffs in the lawsuit that is considered a hallmark of the American judicial system was attorney Fred Gray, whose dedication to civil rights began well before taking the bar exam.
But I was going to take it, pass it, become a lawyer, and destroy everything segregated I could find.
In Selma, when a young John Lewis and the Freedom Riders were beaten and arrested, it was Gray whom they called. Gray successfully defended his friend Martin Luther King Jr. on tax evasion charges in front of an all-white jury. In 1932 in Tuskegee, Alabama, the United States government began a study of the effects of syphilis on black males without telling any of the men the truth that the research being done was all a hoax. And in 1974, Fred Gray successfully represented survivors and the heirs of participants in a landmark case that resulted in a multi-million-dollar settlement. We asked the trailblazer how he wants history to remember him.
I'd like for them to remember me as one of those lawyers who saw problems that existed in this community and did everything he could to eradicate those problems.
We talked and had our meeting. That last such meeting, believe it or not, on December the 1st, 1955. I told Ms. Parks that I had a business engagement out of town. When I returned to Montgomery, it was after 5 o'clock. It was about 6 or so. And I had a lot of phone calls, including a phone call from Mrs. Parks. And I had a phone call from her secretary telling me that Mrs. Parks had been arrested.
The buses are empty. Why? Because the Negro people aren't riding them. Because one woman, a seamstress, tired after a hard day's work, got fed up with her 40 years of living under Jim Crow. Because one woman said, "I have had enough." And suddenly, just like that, 50,000 voices answered, "Amen, sister, enough for us too."
And the driver of the day of her arrest was James Fred Blake. And in 1943, Ms. Parks had an incident with that driver in which she got off the bus after she had paid her fare, and he drove off. And she promised herself that she would never ride that bus again as long as that guy was the driver.
Mrs. Park worked across the street as a seamstress, and so this was monumental to our family because we heavily participated in the bus boycott of 1955. As our taxi cab business transported the walkers during the bus boycott for a whole year and a half.
Well, the history of the barbershop started with an uncle, J.C. James Clark Howard, in 1937. And of course, he ran this shop until 1952. And he went into the funeral business. And along the way, I came on in 1944 at 6 years old with him. During those days, as when you got old enough to understand directions, you went to work. And my family, you had a job to do. And my dad brought me to live with my uncle. We lived in Lowndes County, my family. And my uncle lived in Montgomery, so he brought me to Montgomery to live with my uncle and do stuff around the barbershop, clean up, answer the phone, shine shoes, and that kind of thing. Right. And those were my early days when I came on to the barbershop. It was not a salon then; it was a barbershop, very serious barbershop, good service barbershop. Right. Had barbershop calf company. Right. And they both were good service.
Mrs. Rosa Parks, what a lady. Quiet, but very powerful. Because of what she did, it inspired people like me to run for office. Today, this year, I'm celebrating 50 years of public service. In 1972, I was elected as the first African-American mayor of the historic city of Tuskegee, Alabama. But that would not have been possible had I not been inspired by Mrs. Rosa Parks.
Black folk were treated just like second-class citizens for all of that time. They didn't have no concern about giving you no part of the bathroom, a meal, or anything. You came to town to shop and buy what you wanted, and when you bought it, you get out of town.
Right.
Yeah, Montgomery Improvement Association. That's the original organization. That's whose movement was wrapped around.
I was concerned about ultimately filing a lawsuit because I knew it was going to take a lawsuit to ultimately solve the problem, because I didn't think that the city and other bus company would voluntarily agree. And Joanne and I sat in her living room and made the plans for the Montgomery bus boycott. And Joanne said, well, my pastor, Reverend Martin Luther King, haven't been here long, haven't been involved in civil rights activities, but what he can do, he can end up moving people with words. I said, that's what we need. Is that day when black people stayed off of the buses is going to be successful, and it was going to continue, and the rest of it is history.
We all know that the Voting Rights Act is really the crown jewel of the civil rights movement. So the Supreme Court overturning this case would really be a detriment to our country, and really would be a detriment to the work that Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, Attorney Fred Gray, and so many others fought so hard to see through.
The enslaved were brought from the Alabama River through this tunnel up to the Court Square fountain to be bought and sold away from one another. If you can just imagine the bitterness and grief and sadness and hopelessness the enslaved people must have felt knowing that they were marching to be sold away. Can you imagine husbands and wives and children sold away from one another? And the oppression and sadness they must have felt.
The one thing that is very important is that we understand economics. Dr. King, when he was shot and assassinated, that was his main objective, was to get us back to a point to understand the power of the dollar within our community, and how economics, after integration, after we fought all the wars, won all the fights in government, is that now we have to deal with how our dollar is spent and how we can empower ourselves, just as other nationalities have empowered themselves in America.
As a community, we gain access to restaurants, hotels, and that stuff, but we lost community. We lost community. We lost black communities in this time. Our losses were as great as our gains. The black community operated independently within itself. Our dollar stayed in our community at that time. After, quote, integration, that never really happened. We desegregated, but we didn't integrate.
You are in Tuskegee, the pride of the swift-growing South. This is hallowed ground. This is a battlefield for the movement. This is a citadel of the civil rights movement, started right here in the hometown of Mrs. Rosa Louisa Parks, the mother of the civil rights movement, and we shall not stop until we make her birthday, or the day that she sat down in December in Montgomery, Alabama, as a national holiday, a national federal holiday.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have a resolution today that I wanted to present. I passed on yesterday for Rosa Parks Day, honoring her as a civil rights icon. And most recently, federal lawmakers have embarked on an initiative to make Rosa Parks' birthday, which is February 4th, a national celebrated holiday. And when this bill was passed, Mrs. Park will be the first woman in history to have a national recognized holiday.
We need to
be organized, to work together instead of being so scattered about and not having any positive outlook on life.
We're both advocates and activists. Advocates care for and about the needs and concerns of other people, but activists do something about it.
Liberty, let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound